It's another episode of the Sherpa's Podcast Picks, coming to you from Sherpaloo Studios on Mount Podcastia. We'll be talking about podcasts for you to listen to, and it's all brought to you by our talented, charismatic host. Wait, he's not here? Oh, I guess you'll just have to settle for Jim the Podcast Sherpa instead.
Welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. It's the podcast about, podcasts. And now, coming to you from Mount Podcastia, here's your host who wonders what's on your podcast playlist, Jim the Podcast Sherpa.
Hello there, Rebels of the Sherpalution, and welcome to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. It is a special listen to this episode, and we want you to listen to this very podcast, mostly because of our guest today.
Who's our guest today, Sherpa?
His name is Dallas Taylor. He is the host of a podcast called 20,000 Hertz, and we're going to do a little experiment, okay? Now listen to this. Actually, I'm going to be really quiet. Watch. Now, in that time that I didn't talk, and I know it's rare, and you had that silence, what did you hear around you? Maybe if you're driving in a car, you heard the engine, right? You heard maybe the traffic outside. If you're home, maybe you heard somebody in your family making some noise, maybe one of the appliances going on, stuff like that. This is what 20,000 Hertz is about. It's all the sounds that are around us and the stories behind them. And these are just the really interesting sounds, not like somebody humming or whistling or something like that. The episode that we're going to feature is about the origin of that sound that you hear when you turn on Netflix. You know that one? And there is a really fascinating story behind it. And we will be featuring that episode. And we will be chatting with Dallas Taylor first. We're going to get to know him. And Dallas is a really interesting guy. And I'm glad that I got the opportunity to talk with him because I've been listening to this podcast for a while. And I definitely wanted to share an episode of his podcast with all of you Rebels of the Sherpalution out there. And I think you're going to enjoy it. And I hope that you do. And that you hit the subscribe button for Dallas's podcast as well. I know that I haven't had too many new episodes with podcasters or even creators for the Sherpa Screening Room. So this is a perfect way to end Mental Wealth Month. Now, okay, maybe you missed it. Maybe you just started listening to this show now. So you missed the first 3 weeks of January. It's okay. You get a pass on Mental Wealth Month. You can make that start any month that you like to. And you get to do that through this product called Magic Mind. And I've been using it. I've been telling everybody the last few weeks about the effects of it. And there are two parts to this. It is the 24-hour package, the Magic Mind Mental Performance Shot, and the Magic Mind Sleep Performance Shot. One of them, when you're awake, you take a quick swig of it. You can have it even with your morning coffee. There's not a lot of caffeine in it, very mild. It'll get rid of all that procrastination. It'll get rid of that brain fog. It gets you all dialed in for the day and gives you that focus that we all really crave, right? Don't you hate going through those days where you're like, I wish I felt awake? This'll do the trick for you, folks. And also, if you want to really have a great day of performance, you need a good night's sleep too. And that's what the Magic Mind Sleep Performance Shot will do for you as well. It's non-habit forming. There's no melatonin in it. And it has been clinically proven to help improve the quality of your sleep. And you know what? You wake up refreshed. You don't feel groggy. It's not like you drank alcohol or anything like that. There's no alcohol in this. No alcohol at all. There's just a bunch of real ingredients like organic kava, organic chamomile, organic ashwagandha, which will help you reclaim your sleep. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff in there that's really good for you too. And I have to tell you that they didn't come out with this till pretty recently. And I have to tell you, this is working really well for me. They sent me a case and you take a little shot about a half hour before you go to bed. And when I'm in bed and I just get all relaxed, I fall right asleep. It is so relaxing and exactly what they promised, to wake up feeling refreshed and not groggy like you need more sleep. You know, that's exactly what happened with me. You know, just had a great night's sleep, felt very relaxed and definitely did the job, Rebels. You know what? So it's the end of January. It's the end of Mental Wealth Month. But, that doesn't mean that you're out of luck. No, 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 no. All you have to do is go to magicmind.com / and in capitals, Sherpa, SHERPA, Jan, JAN, and you can get 45% off of the 24-hour pack. That's a case of the Magic Mind Mental Performance Shot and the Magic Mind Sleep Performance Shot. And all you have to do is use that code, and we'll have it right there in the show notes just in case you forget it after you've done listening to this podcast. I think it'll do you some good. And really, in the time that I've been taking it, no harmful after effects, just very relaxing. Focus in the daytime, sleep at night. Rebels, you can't do any better than that, to be perfectly honest with you. So check them out. Go to magicmind.com. And our next order of business is our interview with Mr. Dallas Taylor, the host of 20,000 Hertz. And right after that, we will check out an episode of his podcast. Stay tuned, because it's coming right now. Hello there, Rebels of the Sherpolution. We are here in the sound room of the Sherpa Chalet. My guest today is the founder of De Facto Media, and that is a sound design company. And not only that, he just happens to be the host of one of my favorite podcasts, which is on my podcast playlist regularly. Well, bi-weekly anyway. His name is Dallas Taylor. The name of his podcast is 20,000 Hertz. And I usually ask where you were from, and I didn't ask where you're coming to us from, Dallas.
I'm coming to you from the cloud.
The cloud. I like that.
Cloud. I exist in your ears. I exist on your phone. That's where I am.
It is the sound cloud, obviously.
It's the sound cloud. It wasn't copywritten.
So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Sherpa.
So now...
Uh-oh. I think we got the mute again.
Again?
We're learning about how buttons on a microphone should be very tactile because Jim has a new mic and he's just brushing it and it's going mute. And so we won't call out the name of this microphone, but if you're listening, you know who you are.
And if things go quiet, you know why.
All right.
So anyway, I wanted to start off, before I ask some questions, I wanted to thank you because a lot of your episodes really brought back sounds from me growing up, and particularly in the time that we are recording this. Your most recent episode had to do with radio jingles, and you actually featured the radio stations that I listened to growing up as a kid in Long Island. WABC, if you were on Jones Beach during the summer of the 60s or the 70s, that was pretty much the only radio station that was playing. And it really just took me back to when I was a little kid.
Well, that's the amazing thing about sound in general is how it can recall memories really vividly. And so playing especially something like a radio jingle that you grew up with, you can kind of put yourself back in that place that you were, in that mindset. And it is kind of a form of mental time travel when you have a sound that you can recall kind of everything around that time period.
Yeah, that's true. And even like when you get older, and like if you go in like your relative's house and there's certain smells that remind you of foods that you ate when you were a kid, really sound really does the same thing, even more so sometimes, I think.
It does. It's a really powerful human sense. Similar to taste, that can really take you into places and remind you of things. And the way that I think about my show, 20,000 Hertz, is it is this Anthony Bourdain or Julia Child's version of what I think about as in, presenting sounds or thinking about sound and celebrating sound in this way where, quote unquote, normal people out there can really start to become more human and feel great about their sonic world around them. So it's really like the whole mission underneath all of this is to get people to really unlock that sense of hearing and really love it, like, someone like I do.
Sure. A while back, I was lucky enough to interview a guy named Frank Verderosa, and Frank was the audio engineer for the Gilbert Gottfried podcast. And he does what you do with sound design and everything like that. And I kind of postulated a little theory, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. I said to him, I said, you guys probably hear very differently than everybody else. You probably have more of a sensitivity to like the tiny sounds that maybe go around the louder sounds.
You're probably right, even though it's not something that I necessarily consciously think about at this phase in my life. It's just so organic in the way that I think. But you're right. I am the type of person that if an annoying hum or something is around me, I'll focus in on it and I want to find where that thing is and eliminate it. Because I really love quiet and I really love clarity. And more than anything, my favorite sound in the world are the voices of friends, family, loved one, colleagues, and I want to hear all the nuance of that voice performance that they're giving me, because there's words, but then there's also the melody, which also says something in addition to the words. And I love having quiet where, communication and deep communication can happen.
I can understand, there is a music to people's voices, even if it's just oral, I guess, because of the pitch and, maybe the familiarity of it too. Like when you're familiar with a song, you kind of know what notes are going to hit. And, when people are talking to you, they may say Dallas a certain way and it just maybe triggers something. Like we were talking about triggering memories. It kind of goes back to that.
People's accents, those things bring me into places, and different accents are endearing. And I don't know, just hearing the texture of someone's voice is just a really pleasing. It's not only a pleasing thing to me, it's just a pleasing thing to a human. But as our world's kind of gotten noisier and uncurated, and we're not really conscious about what the world can sound like, we tend to just kind of fall into accepting it. And you can think of the same way of like food. Prior to YouTube or these opportunities to learn from the greatest people all over the world, food was not as accessible. Great food, or at least great cooking, wasn't as accessible to people. And so yeah, that's kind of the way that I feel about what my whole vibe is really just getting people to unlock this, one of our 5 core major senses to become more human and feel, be able to enjoy the sonic world around them.
Yeah, it's funny because, you kind of tapped into something so universal that I don't think a lot of people do think about. And the fact that you can do episodes and bring out the stories of what these little sounds that you're hearing, even if it's from a car, from an appliance, from a TV show that you're watching. There are people behind that, and there are reasons and, sometimes conflicts behind that as well. And that's all comes out in your podcast.
Exactly. Yeah, that's behind every sound that has been created. There's somebody and there's a story and there's a why that's really fascinating. And then there's oftentimes many other alternate sounds if it was a designed sound. And why didn't they go in that direction? Mm-hmm. It's also kind of born out of my world, and I have a sound design studio, so it's something we think about a lot. But even with the show, we do things on sonic branding, and really, I think what it is that there's incredible brilliance in the sound community and the people who are crafting these sounds. And I feel a very strong duty to preserve those for the future, because there's so many incredible sound stories out there that will just drift off into history if they're not documented. And so that's almost the way I feel about 20,000 Hertz, is I'm trying to capture these stories for all of perpetuity for the next generation of people who are going to go into sonic branding, and to make the world a better sounding place in 50 years or 100 years, or at least start to enlighten people on the the effects of sound, both from a positive and a negative level, to where we can all live a better human life.
I think you should be the minister of sound at that point with that with that reasoning.
Talk about what I do as evangelism sometimes. I do feel like I'm kind of like an audio evangelist.
I like that. I can see that.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that your favorite sound is hearing your friends and your family, and obviously your wife and your kids. What's your least favorite sound?
That's a good question.
Is there anything that drives you crazy, or?
I think the normal things. I don't know if I would go as far as to say I have misophonia, which misophonia can be like a deep frustration and hatred toward a specific sound. I think the one that most people think about most often would be something like nails on a chalkboard, people chewing, cutlery, kind of tapping on plates, those sort of things. So those things bug me too. But I would say that I probably have a much better, if I thought through this, but I would say that my least favorite sounds are offensive sounds that could be fixed. with minimal effort. For example, every 6 months or so, I'll take a can of WD-40 to all of the hinges in all of my doors because I hate the sound of like a squeaky, whiny hinge. And it's such an easy thing to eliminate. Or if there's any sort of persistent white noise somewhere, kind of rooting that out and getting rid of it. I do appreciate the character and the creaks of stuff and of an old home. If it's something that's kind of part of the DNA of it, it can be vibey. But yeah, I would say that just things that could sound better. In my line of work, we do a lot of my team and I do a lot of sound design and mixing for trailers and TV and YouTube and films and games and stuff. And anytime I hear something that I go, my team and I could make that like objectively better. That's where it's more of like the tug of, gosh, I wish I could get my hands on that just to make it sound better. But the thing is most people don't even notice that it doesn't sound the best it can be to begin with. And so I think that's the hard thing. It's like an acceptance of mediocre sound when I know I can objectively make it better. That's probably my least favorite sound.
Yeah, and you did mention that you do sound for TV and movies. What are some of the stuff that you've worked on?
I would say that a lot of the stuff that we do, we've worked on a lot of documentaries. There was one probably about a decade ago at this point called Blood Brother that was really delightful. I think it's on Netflix. It was something that won Sundance, and there are 2 big categories. Done a lot of kind of heavy documentaries on various, subjects and various kind of scripted films that have come out. I don't work in kind of the LA world, but I would say that what we do the most of is like trailers, and that you can pretty much name any Netflix thing of the past 5 years, and we've worked on their trailers, or major ad campaigns and stuff. And so we'll probably do maybe like 2 films a year. Maybe one or both could be a documentary. Sometimes it's scripted, sometimes it's not. People financing movies, it's a hard thing to get money to actually make a movie. And so what'll happen is a lot of the people that we work with on the advertising side may get some good fortune financially and then be able to make a feature film, and then they'll bring us along with it. I really love human story stuff, and I gravitate toward documentary style, even though we do work in a lot of scripted. But I just love documentaries because they're real, and it's a real story, and it's a real story that can be crystallized and communicated to the masses. So that's typically where I kind of like love. And I guess it makes sense that for my fun time, I also make a podcast that is basically human stories. That's all about sound and crystallizing these messages.
You are actually the first guest that I've had on the show you've done a TED Talk, right?
I did a TED Talk, yeah.
I'm going to guess it was obviously about sound.
It was about John Cage's 433 composition. And I was serendipitous. I mean, not serendipitously, it's probably a terrible way of saying it, but I had been talking to the TED team, I think it was like early 2020, maybe late 2019, about doing a TED Talk. And I was going to do it in Vancouver on the big red circle with all the people. And I generally operate under the guiding principle of is if somebody asks you to do something very cool, you just say yes and you figure out everything else. So I said yes, regardless of the terror involved. And then late March, it was becoming clear that I think it was late March, something like it, maybe early March, whenever all of that fiasco went down.
Yeah, like around St. Patrick's Day, yeah.
So it pivoted from we're not doing Vancouver. We need to film it just in your office, and even better, you'll film it in your own office. And so I ended up doing a legit like main stage talk, but sitting right here in this exact chair that I'm talking to you from. So I didn't have to do the terror in front of all the people, but it is a real deal TED Talk, main stager.
I know that you did an episode about it. Could you let everybody know what the John Cage composition was about?
Yeah, we had done an episode prior, and it was a episode that I went into as a former music student. My experience with 433 was it was this weird joke that John Cage was playing on everyone. That's just kind of what I thought the show was going to be. Mm-hmm. And then when we got deeply into it, I realized, oh no, John Cage and I are are cut from the same cloth. Like what John Cage was trying to communicate here is that when you remove and you become conscious about the sounds that are physically around you in this space, you can appreciate them. And like, there is no such thing as silence. It's a silent piece, but there is no such thing as silence. So appreciating the sounds around you, becoming conscious about those sounds around you, and then really enjoying and really relishing in those through that consciousness. And I know that sounds like really like, I don't know, it almost sounds like mystical, and I'm not really meaning that. What I really mean is like, you can consciously listen. Most of the time we passively listen. I consciously listen a lot because it's part of my job, but everyone can consciously listen. All it takes is going, I'm going to consciously listen right now. And I'm consciously listening. And anybody who heard me say that, like right now for 2 seconds, just listen to what's around you. You just consciously listened. Awesome. So I think it's just like getting people in tune that you can not only consciously listen, but you can also adjust that soundscape around you. Like we can all be sound designers, just like everyone can cook.
For some, it takes a little bit more work, but yes. When I was probably like in high school, I would usually just study in my room and I would play music. And I guess the music was kind of loud, but like my parents never complained. They were like, how can you study if that music is playing so loud? And they said, it kind of drowns everything else out. And it creates a focus on what I'm reading. I wouldn't really get distracted by the actual music that was playing. It was just kind of like a buffer for me. Is that weird?
No, not at all. I think what you're kind of circling around is this concept of music being able to, in some people, be able to quiet their minds and focus. I spent most of my life through childhood and into teenage years and into college years and beyond, very much in music. And I had no idea why I gravitated toward music. I wasn't a great student at anything, but music, I was like, I'm all in. And it's taken me decades to really start to unpack why, out of all the things I could have done. What was it about music and sound that what am I getting as a human from this music that is like so deep? And I think what it is that I have a noisy brain. When there's nothing going on, I'm thinking about a million things all the time. A lot of people are thinking of a million things. There's just a fire hose of stimulation that happened to us moment by moment, day by day in this culture. And what music does is it lets your mind just like fully consume on it. And the amazing thing about sound and music is that sound and music can't be seen ahead of time, and you can't hear it in the past. Like music and sound is right now in the present. And when we think of things like depression is living in the past and anxiety is living in the future, a really amazing tool for becoming present is becoming present in music, like listening to music and fully thinking, like letting your brain just really zone in on it. And then you're living in that present moment of emotion, and you're kind of like vibing your brain waves with this person who made this music. And that's a really special thing. And I would say if you could take that even a step further, I often say that the greatest music that exists is music that is being performed by your friends and your family and your children. Because there's another level of intimacy there, and another level of being present. And so I love hearing music from friends, even if it's not super proficient. It's the love and it's the intimacy of being present with that person in an emotion.
Yeah, and I guess it's also sharing something that means something to you as well. You know,
Yeah.
It's even like when you tell somebody, "Hey, I just heard this great song," and you downloaded it, and you're like, check this song out. It's, I guess it's kind of what bonded us as cavemen, where we made friends, right? People said, oh, it'd be like.
Yeah, I'll bang on this tree trunk if you, rattle that, those dry beans over there. Yeah, it's a way to just kind of sync emotions and brainwaves and, just human intimacy. Music is just an incredibly human, beautiful thing. And I would take that as far as to say it's, everything is music if you want to think of it that way. And so I think a lot about even just the way that I use my voice. It's something that I think at this age that I've gotten to, it's something I've realized that I can I can use it as music, even if I'm not pulling my trumpet out and playing it in a traditional sense. But really everything I do can give people, hopefully, like make them feel warm and cared about and like present and, try to sync up with them. So yeah, I think a lot about like just that and just listening to other people do that too.
Yeah.
I think if you think about the people who make you feel the best in life, think about the melody that they're singing to you when they speak to you.
Dallas did not come here empty-handed. He brought an episode with him, which is actually one of my favorite episodes, about that little sound effect that you hear when you start up Netflix. And there was a fascinating story behind it. And this is what a lot of the episodes of his podcast are about. So we were trying to decide which one was a good one to use. And I said to Dallas, this is one of my favorites. So he was like, let's do it. So what are some of your thoughts when you did that episode?
When we were doing the Netflix one, and I've just talked a lot about kind of all these brain science and stuff, but we do zoom in on just, this is a famous sound, how was it made? And then some science comes out of that. So the Netflix one is interesting because it took us so many years to just get access. That's the most difficult part about the show, is that when we want to tell the story about like the iPhone, like ringtone, it's a process to try to do that, because I don't really want to talk about it secondhand. I don't want somebody speculating. I want to talk to the actual person who was either the hands on the control, and I want to talk to the person who kind of gave the directive of what we're trying to achieve. So that's what happened in the Netflix show. Is essentially what happened was, I don't think I've ever said this like to anyone. Essentially, I thought, okay, I think the Netflix Sonic logo is the end of House of Cards season 2 when Frank Underwood hits this desk and goes boom, boom. Everyone on the internet says that's what it is. And I went, okay, if I want to tell the story about this particular sound, I need to go to the House of Cards sound designer and ask. And so the House of Cards sound designer, or at least led the sound team in some way, was Ren Kleiss, legendary sound designer. I've never met Ren. I'd love to. I've watched so much stuff. And so I wrote Ren an email and I said, hey, I think you did the Netflix Sonic logo. Was that you? And Ren goes, oh, that's so cool that you would think that was me. I can hear why you would think that, but no, the Netflix Sonic logo is not me. It was actually my friend Lon Bender. And I went, oh, let me talk to Lon. So I went out and I found Lon and I said, I heard you did the Sonic logo. And Lon said, yes, we did the Sonic logo. And, I kind of asked like, oh, so it's not the Bang Bang. And he was like, no, I mean, it was like something in the ecosystem, but they were doing hundreds. You don't just pull something from a show and go, that's our Sonic logo. You go through hundreds of iterations. You try a million different things. It's an exploration process that takes a year, more than a year. I mean, it's a long process. And so he had kind of explained, that was like, it's like, it was in the alchemy of that time, but they were trying kind of things from all over the place. And then it kind of eventually became divorced from, it was never really like attached to that. And so they just started rebuilding things, trying things, went through this long process. And I captured the storyline. I heard that the Bang Bang was actually Lon. And then one of Lon's, I believe, employees, Charlie Campagna, was the one that did the Blossom sound. And it wasn't that he made that Blossom sound for that. I'm going to give away the whole show here. I better stop. Anyway, I'll stop short. Basically, I interviewed these two people, and then I eventually reached back out to Netflix, says, I want to tell this story. And they said, oh, this is so awesome. Yeah, I'll get you in touch with Todd Yellen and Tanya Kumar, who are on our side leading these efforts. And so it's a puzzle piece that takes a really long time to put together. Our audience gets a nice, succinct 25-minute long episode, but it takes 4 or 5, in the case of our Apple episodes, that was a 5-year process to get access. With Netflix, it was multi-year. I know that. And then when we get it, then you have the direct source, you have the direct reasoning, you have exactly why, again, to preserve that story. And it turns out it was just an amazing story with little funny twists and turns along the way.
Definitely.
And even a little Easter egg in there that no one's going to believe that almost got put into that logo.
So while we're talking about sounds and you've got your earbuds on, or maybe you're driving, I'm sure there are some podcast sounds from other folks that you enjoy. I was wondering what some of them might be.
Oh, do you mean like what are my favorite podcasts? Or
Yep.
Okay, so my favorite podcasts, right now, my 2 favorites is probably going to be Hyperfixed and Search Engine. Reply All was my former favorite podcast. And prior to that, I was big into Radiolab, This American Life, and 99% Invisible.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say that those three shows, Radiolab, 99PI, and 99 or and This American Life, that is the direct inspiration for like how I tell stories. It's from that. And then you have these shows like Reply All, Hyperfixed, Search Engine that are brilliant in telling a story, but they're doing more. Like they sound informal, but they're so good at what they do, telling stories. So those are the ones that I would say like I recently just heard the first episode of Hyperfixed, and I was just in awe of how Alex Goldman can take a very seemingly simple story and just T-bone you, like with some secondary thing that happens out of nowhere. And that episode was just mind-blowing, and just from a craft perspective. And it sounds so easy, and it's not. And he's just so talented.
That was actually one of the episodes that I sampled a few weeks ago. The one I listened to was about the milk in the supermarkets, why it's stored that way.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow. So I know exactly what you're talking about, Dallas.
What got me is he posted on Instagram and said that they did a episode on why bathrooms and how they're terrible, and I chimed in saying like, why are they so quiet? That's horrible. And he chimed in and said, oh, that's part of the show. And I was like, okay, fine. I'll one thing that ruins your podcast listening is making a podcast, I find, and so I have a lot of catching up to do.
Okay. But before I let you go, there is a portion of the show that we like to call shameless self-promotion. And this is where you can let everybody know, all about your show and where they can catch up with you.
Shameless self-promotion.
All right. So my show is called 20,000 Hertz, and it's all spelled out without any numbers, which I don't know, may have been a mistake because so many people just write it out with numbers. Luckily, even if you write it out with numbers, all the podcast players will probably find it. It's a nice purple swirly icon logo, and we have over 200 episodes now. The thing is every episode that we do is evergreen. So every episode we've ever made can be consumed at any point. We're not news. We don't do things that are just like breaking or any of that. It's like we're telling timeless stories intentionally. So every episode takes us 200 to 300 hours to make, and it all comes down to sounding effortless. And, for me, my goal is to be the best, most highly produced podcast in all of podcasting and be able to do that and tell peak level, amazing human stories. So that's so I highly recommend checking it out. Also, I would say if you've heard one episode of 20,000 Hertz, you've heard one episode of 20,000 Hertz, because we program our show very intentionally. And I'll give you a little bit of a tip here. If you hear incredibly funny or joyful shows, there's a good chance that you're going to hear the complete opposite soon. So we do things not only in our show to give you big emotional dynamic range, but even in our programming, we're very intentional with not playing the same vibe repeatedly. And so you'll really start to pick up on even just kind of like these tonal shifts and emotional shifts from episode to episode. Outside of that, a lot of how we pay for this show is with my sound design company. It's called De Facto Sound. We mix trailers, ads, documentaries, films, game stuff, tons of stuff. Check out the website, defactosound.com, if that's something that you are in the advertising industry or something. But yeah, the one thing everyone can do is go in their podcast player as you're hearing my voice right now, typing in 20,000 Hertz. Now you see it. Now hit follow or subscribe. You've had all the time in the world unless you're driving, so no excuse.
There you go. The man has spoken. This has been a pleasure to meet you and get to know you a little bit. Dallas Taylor, 20,000 Hertz is the podcast. It's on my podcast playlist. It should be on yours too. Dallas, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Nowadays, it's hard to imagine a world without Netflix, but it's also easy to forget how relatively young Netflix is. It really wasn't that long ago when you'd log in and load up a movie queue, then wait for 3 DVDs to come in the mail. Fast forward to 2007. Around the time they mailed off their billionth DVD, they decided to start streaming some of their content. Since then, Netflix has grown into the household staple that it is today. But really, what I'm most interested in is the story behind this sound. You're listening to 20,000 Hertz. I'm Dallas Taylor. The Netflix sound logo debuted in 2015. Since then, it's become the quintessential sonic brand of all sonic brands.
We actually call the sound Tudum.
That's Todd Yellen. He oversees what's called the product experience at Netflix.
We have a wonderful content team that produces and licenses all of the comedies and dramas and TV shows and movies that you see on the service. Our job is to take the baton from them and to create a great experience around it.
Before Netflix, Todd was a filmmaker, and he had a particular love for sound design. So when Netflix started producing a lot of their own content, Todd immediately realized that they could use a sound logo. He ended up leading the process that eventually resulted in that iconic Tudum.
The thinking was, shouldn't we have a sound that when you hear that, it makes you think of, wow, I'm about to get a treat. I'm about to get an amazing story that's very relevant to me. And that's most importantly, cinematic in my home.
Recognizing that Netflix could use a sound logo was the easy part. Deciding exactly what that sound should be is way harder.
First off, and arguably most important, it had to be really short. And the reason it had to be short is, as opposed to in a movie theater, when you have a captive audience, and they're going to be there and they paid their $10 and they're going to watch whatever you throw at them. So some of the grander sound idents you can imagine, like THX, great one, it's really long. The dun-dun-dun-dun from 20th Century Fox, long. Even Leo the Lion was too long. Because in our age of click and play, you get to Netflix, you want to be able to click, and there's no patience, and you want that great experience, and you almost want it immediately. So the first thing is it had to be short. Past that, I said, I don't want an electronic sound that is reminiscent of a game platform like Xbox, or a computer like Apple, or an operating system like Microsoft launching. Because we are in the entertainment business, and even though we are the double helix of entertainment and technology coming together, wanted to make sure that it sounded more cinematic than electronic and computer-ish.
Todd knew that when someone heard this sound, he wanted them to immediately think Netflix. Generally, in the world of sonic branding, there's two ways to do that. The first way is just to say the name and the sound.
This is CNN.
Bad robot. PlayStation.
The other way is a lot harder. Where do you even start to make a sound that captures the entire spirit and heart of a company?
I don't want Netflix, the name being said, but I want eventually the sound to be, you hear it and you think, aha, it's Netflix. And we knew lots of repetition would do that. And I thought like some kind of call and response thing would be interesting, and maybe something that builds up tension and then releases it, just like a story does. But you got to do that in like 3 seconds. One of the directions I would give is don't be afraid to be quirkier or different. You know, an obvious one that comes to mind is the HBO static. And that's not static. That's like the most annoying sound, but they've made it into a positive thing. So wanted to try all kinds of things. We started listening to a bunch of potential sound designers, composers who might be the right person to do this for us.
After many, many, many different attempts, Todd decided to call up a sound designer he loved working with in the past.
I had a phone call out of the blue from Todd Yellen.
That's Lon Bender.
He is just an Academy Award-winning sound designer. I wasn't even sure if they would do this kind of work, but he was interested. So I gave him the direction of the kinds of things we were looking for. I said, try all kinds of bits and don't be afraid to be quirky.
At this point, Todd had gone through tons of different composers and sound designers. He had folders full of demos, but none of them still sounded quite right. Todd was hoping Lon could help make a sound that checked all of the boxes. Tension, release, not too electronic, quirky, something that screams Netflix, but without actually saying it. And all of that in a few short seconds. Seemingly an impossible challenge. Here's Lon.
We had all types of programming that this had to work for, so it couldn't be in any one genre because there was dramas and comedies and romantic things and action things. So all of those things have very vast differences in terms of the type of audiences. And I think Netflix wants to be a company that's delivering all these different things. We tried many different roads. There was a lot of work done with sound effects, straight sound effects. We had things that were funny, we had things that were irreverent, we had things that were about opening doors, things about time ticking. There's all kinds of different approaches using sound effects. I think we'd come up with 20 or 30 choices. We broke them down into groups, and each group was different areas of aesthetics in terms of musical things and sound effects things and things that were a combination of the two.
Music boxes and strange instruments, things I've never heard about coming from every corner of the globe. And then he tried things that were like actual sounds from the filmmaking process. Here's sounds from old-fashioned filmmaking. So we tried all kinds of bits.
After going through countless options, there were just a couple sounds that made it into the final round.
One thing I was initially attracted to was if we were going to do that call and response, that like create tension and then resolve it really quickly, I liked the sound of a goat. It was funny, and I thought it was quirky, and it was our version of Leo the Lion. And so for a while, we were stuck on that goat sound. I thought that would be a good time.
So I can't play the sound for you, but I did hear one of the goat options they considered. And it's, very goaty. It was basically an ending response to the Tudum we already know and love. Here's my best impression on what I heard. Yeah.
Then we had another one where it was a little more electronic than I was wanting, but I kind of like it. It was ethereal, bubbly sound from the depths of the oceans or something like that. I don't even remember where he got it from. Sometimes it has nothing to do with what it evokes, where you actually get the sound from. But I remember liking that one as well.
Hindsight being 2020, it's easy to look back and think that these sounds clearly aren't as good as the Netflix sound we know and love today. But when you're listening to tons of options over and over again, it's easy to lose perspective. The right choice becomes a lot less clear.
How the heck do you decide which one to use? And that's a lot of pressure because this thing we knew is going to get millions, hundreds of millions, billions of impressions. People are going to hear this around the world. Oh my God, that's a lot of pressure.
By this point, Todd needed outside opinions, so his team created an anonymous blind survey that would go out to thousands of people. They didn't tell these people what these sounds were for. They just wanted, in general, to get their opinion on the sound. Now, they could have just played every sound for every person and have them pick their favorite. But Todd wasn't necessarily interested on which sound would be people's favorites. He was more interested in how each individual sound made people feel. So instead, they decided to play a single sound for a bunch of people.
And then see what words come to their mind and what they associate. And then thousands of other people try a different sound.
At this point, they compiled all the words that came back for each sound. For instance, that rejected bubbly sound produced words like curious and relaxed. But one of the most common words was confused.
It was like, don't really like the confused.
But when they gathered the results from the Tudum sound,
overall impression, dramatic, interesting, beginning, good, short. When we go, what does it make you think of? By far, and this is what got me excited, and this is probably what led to this being the winner. And the biggest word by far was movie. And they didn't know this was a Netflix sound. We were just asking consumers, what do you think of the sound? What does it evoke? And so they put movie in great.
Todd was getting very close. After an entire year of countless versions, iterations, first impressions, there were just a few final sounds left. These contenders still had to pass through one last test, and it was a big one.
I needed one more arbiter. You know, this is a lot of pressure. Billions of people are going to hear this. So I got home and sat down, did a little nighttime work, and my 10-year-old daughter, she's wandering about, and I go, Samara, I need some help. Get over here. And I played for Samara our 5 top sounds, and she was immediately, no hesitation, it's so obvious, Dad, it's this one. And she was gesturing towards the sound file for the one that we used, the Tudum.
Finally, after a year of work and trial and error, Todd and his team did it. They finally had a sound they were proud of. This sound would go on to define the Netflix brand. But we still haven't found out how that sound was actually made. What were those 2 hits? And where did that resolve sound come from? Also, you probably don't know that Netflix actually has a second sonic logo. All of that after the break. Just like you, I've probably heard the Netflix sound thousands of times in my life. Compound that by every Netflix subscriber around the world, and almost like the digits of pi, we can't possibly calculate how many times this sound has been heard in total. But what we can do is break down what this sound is actually made of. Here's sound designer Lon Bender.
It's a combination of music and of the sound effects of these knocks, which are my wedding ring that I'm wearing, knocking on the side of a cabinet in our bedroom. And in order to add different qualities to it, I sweetened it with other things, which is normal for us in the film sound industry. You know, any sound is made up of 4 sounds generally. There was a slowed anvil sound, which had a deeper tone.
In addition to the ring and anvil, Lon also added a couple of muted hits to give it a little bit more oomph. Lon was happy with the 2 hits, at least this part of the sound. But by itself, this percussive approach didn't seem like it was enough.
As much as I like the sound effects idea, it had its place, but it didn't give me the aesthetic, lean-in kind of feel that I was hoping for.
Lon needed a musical element that would help draw listeners in. The sound his team ultimately came up with was codenamed the Blossom. It's that tonal swell you hear in the final resolve. That Blossom sound is difficult to place. It's both familiar and strange. You might think it was created by some sort of synthesizer, but it wasn't.
I had used mostly my electric guitar, which ended up being the sound for the Blossom.
That's Charlie Campagna. He's a sound designer and composer who works with Lon.
One of the most important elements of this was the guitar material that Charlie came up with, because I wanted it to have a musical component, but any instrument that was played straight up, it was too specific because someone would instantly recognize it as that instrument.
They really needed a sound that was unique. They didn't want it to be recognizable as a specific instrument. They definitely didn't want it to be that guitar sound. They wanted it to be that Netflix sound. Ultimately, the Blossom wasn't even a new creation. It actually came from a recording that Charlie made decades ago.
Back in, I would say, the 90s, I bought a piece of gear by Digitech called the 2101, and it was kind of like a modern-day approach to using, heavy guitar amplifiers. So I had really cool reverbs and delays and such. I was trying to learn the unit. I plugged into it, and I also had another piece of gear called the Lexicon Jam Man, which was a 42-second delay that could loop. And you could loop what you're playing, so you could play a phrase and it'll record it, and then you could press a button twice and it reverses it.
What you're hearing right now is Charlie's original recording.
One particular sound stood out at that time, which is the Blossom sound that's used. It's about a 30-second phrase of guitar playing that has been reversed and processed through that Digitech. And I always had it because it's so beautiful, but I never was able to use it. And it just so happened that I decided to use that piece of audio for one of the submissions that I gave to Lon.
And listen carefully right now. Buried in this recording, this happened.
It ended up being directly put in there without any extra sound design. It's literally just the reverse guitar doing its thing.
The reverse and forward nature of it, the fact that it takes you in and takes you out, it was really the perfect sound without it having to be more than one thing.
That orphan sound found its purpose. It found its parents.
This Netflix sound logo has become the gold standard for sonic brands. It's immediately recognizable, and everyone knows that it means Netflix. Another amazing aspect of this is that the sound works for any genre. Think about it. This sound works just as well to introduce The Crown as it does Stranger Things, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, True in the Rainbow Kingdom, Ozark, or BoJack Horseman. But there is one environment where this classic Tudum sound doesn't work so well. And that's where we find Netflix's other sonic logo.
we were sitting in a theater and the Tudum would come on and then the film would start, and it felt so short and so abrupt that you really didn't quite understand what you even saw before you just dove right into the film.
That's Tanya Kumar. She's a brand design lead at Netflix. In addition to the traditional television series, Netflix has also been producing a lot of original films. They started playing these films in theaters around the world. Originally, they used that classic Tudum sound to start the films, just like they would normally do with the shows on their streaming side. But a theater is a very different setting than your couch at home.
So that was the first problem we were trying to solve, is how do you really set the movie mood and set people up for this experience that they're about to see? We are separating our films from our series in a way. You're in a theater, you're here for the long experience, whether it's an hour and a half, whether it's 2 hours, you're here to hear the whole story, to really sit down and experience it in a theater.
They needed something new for the theater, but that still sounded like Netflix. That means the Tudum, or Tudum as Tanya calls it, had to stay in some form.
Our Tudum sound was extremely important. We didn't want to mess with it. We wanted to make sure that that was the tie back to our brand and that we didn't lose sight of something that our members and non-members really loved. So how do you tie in something that's so iconic and only 4 seconds long into something that is a much longer experience? So the big brief really was taking the current sound and implementing it into something much longer.
The process for creating the theatrical sound was a lot quicker than the original Tudum sound. Netflix already had a sound that they loved. They just needed a way to transform it into something more cinematic. And for that, they needed a cinematic composer.
Who had we worked with that we really liked and enjoyed working with, and also who had a, kind of a brand tie to us. So someone who had actually worked on our original content or had experience on our production sets. And, we ended up working with Hans Zimmer, mostly because he did a lot of work with us on The Crown.
Hans Zimmer is a legend. He's composed film scores for movies like The Lion King, Pirates of the Caribbean, Inception, Interstellar, Dunkirk. But I don't need to keep going.
I don't know if you've heard the soundtrack for The Crown. It's beautiful. It's very iconic. It just has the simplicity and elegance to it that we thought was perfect for bringing into our brand as well.
Hans was told by Netflix that they wanted to maintain the Tudum sound, but integrate it into something longer and more cinematic.
We received about 6 or 7 different various compositions in the first round, which we then narrowed down to about 3. It wasn't a lot of brainstorming. I think he immediately picked up on what we needed, and we were able to narrow down to about 3 different compositions that felt pretty different. After that, there was a couple more brainstorm sessions and sharing, and we landed on really one that we really liked.
There was some creative back and forth, but when you're working with someone like Hans, it doesn't take long to get the sound right. Here's what Hans came up with. This is the final Netflix theatrical sonic logo in its entirety. Even when they needed something new for the theater, Netflix stayed true to their original sound. It's a testament to just how important sound is to Netflix.
It's kind of a thing that we don't really mess with. We know people love it as is. Even with the updated visuals that we rolled out last year, it was super important to the company that we keep the Tudum sound as is, and the visuals might get an update to help with the story. But holistically, the sound really is kind of something that we don't really touch or play with at this point.
We noticed visual things, visual idents tend to go out of style a lot more often than sounds. And that visual has already evolved. Since we made this, around 6 years ago, it's already changed, and we expect it to change a lot more, where the sound has, pretty much stayed the same since we created it, and I expect it to stay the same for a lot longer.
The Netflix Sonic logo is enormous. It's heard countless times, every day, all over the world. Every other company out there wants a Sonic logo that's this impactful. When I originally spoke with Todd, I mentioned to him just how huge this Netflix sound is in the world of Sonic branding. So every single Sonic branding brief that I've ever received or seen, every one of them refers to the Netflix sound. This is the most influential, popular Sonic brand in the entire world. How does that feel?
So when you say that, honestly, my chest gets a little tighter and I go, oh my God, that's a lot of pressure. Thank God I didn't go with the goat.
Thousand Hertz is hosted by me, Dallas Taylor, and produced out of the sound design studios of De Facto Sound. Find out more at defactosound.com.
This episode was written and produced by Colin DeVarney.
And me, Dallas Taylor.
With help from Sam Sneebly.
It was edited, sound designed, and mixed by Colin DeVarney.
Thanks to our guests, Todd Yellen, Lon Bender, Charlie Campagna, and Tanya Kumar. And a huge thanks to Sarah Jones from Netflix for all of the help with this episode. If you'd like to see the full Netflix theatrical animation, we've embedded that video to this episode's page on 20k.org. Finally, what does the Netflix sound make you think of? And what are your other favorite Sonic brands? If you think we should do a story on it, tell us. You can chat with me and the rest of the 20k team through our website, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or by writing hi@20k.org. Thanks for listening.
Listen and subscribe on podcast apps everywhere. And we're on YouTube at Sherpolution. Sorry, no video. You're welcome.
A very special thanks to Mr. Dallas Taylor. And be sure to check out his podcast, 20,000 Hertz. You can click the subscribe button, catch all of his new episodes, and even some of his old episodes as well. You'll really enjoy it. I promise you that. Would I lie to you? No. Why would I start now anyway? But if you'd like to hear some of my old episodes, on Saturdays we do Sherpa Selects, and we play my favorite episodes from seasons 1 through 6. And if you haven't caught them yet, now's your time. They will be there waiting for you as long as you've got my subscribe button clicked as well. See, I'm getting you all these great subscriptions. You don't want to miss out on this. And you also don't want to miss out on Magic Mind. Make sure you click that little link and see what's going on in that site. And until then, this is the very alert Jim the Podcast Sherpa saying to you, Viva la Sherpolution. I'll see you next time, Rebels.
Thanks for listening to the Sherpa's Podcast Picks. The podcast is now over. Please disperse and tell everyone about us. As long as they don't put us back in jail. Viva la Sherpolution!